Okay, picture this. On one side of the globe, the undisputed heavyweight champion of AI is scrambling to fix a bizarre bug where their flagship model is suddenly hallucinating goblins. Literally, goblins. And on the exact same week, on the other side of the world, a Chinese lab launches a massive stealth attack that fundamentally rewires the entire artificial intelligence landscape. Welcome to the Disruptor strike. In today's Explainer, we're diving into one of the absolute wildest weeks in tech history. We're talking secret routing logs, huge hardware shifts, and a brutal pricing war that started practically overnight.
So, while developers were busy poking around in the backend logs of OpenAI's codex, they stumbled on something that definitely wasn't supposed to be public yet. A secret routing map, explicitly labeled GPT 5.6. Now sure, this could just be internal testing or a canary deployment, but the timing is what makes this a massive story. Because right as those logs leaked, DeepSeek dropped their V4 model onto the market. And they didn't just casually release it, they launched a hyper-aggressive attack aimed squarely at the bottom line of every major Western AI lab. Which begs the question, did this sudden strike from DeepSeek actually force OpenAI to hit the fast-forward button? Well, to answer that, we really need to look at the weapon DeepSeek brought to the fight.
90%. Just let that sink in for a second. DeepSeek didn't just try to edge out the competition on some obscure benchmarks. They slashed API prices by up to 90%. They took what has historically been this very polite, highly academic race for raw performance, and they turned it into a brutal, street-level pricing war in the blink of an eye. They barged into a crowded market, made their model open source, easily modifiable, and just astonishingly cheap to run.
And meanwhile, as DeepSeek is out there aggressively gutting costs, OpenAI was having a very different kind of week. They were battling this chaotic and honestly kind of hilarious bug where their GPT 5.5 model went into full goblin mode. Seriously. Users were noticing the model just randomly injecting words like goblins, gremlins, and trolls into highly technical conversations about like camera gear or code performance. It got so bad that OpenAI had to literally write a system prompt specifically banning trolls and raccoons from their AI's thoughts unless it was clearly relevant. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It so perfectly captures the contrast of this moment, right? You've got the reigning champ swatting away these chaotic frontier quirks, while the underdog is executing this cold, calculated strike.
Section 1. The Hardware Independence Strategy. Okay, let's get in how DeepSeek is actually pulling off this massive disruption. Because if you think this is just a software story, you are missing the much bigger picture. This whole thing is deeply rooted in hardware.
Just look at the ecosystem being built here. Until now, top-tier AI models have relied almost entirely on Nvidia's CUDA ecosystem. It was basically a monopoly. But China is aggressively building a full-stack AI ecosystem so they can survive without depending on those advanced Nvidia chips. DeepSeek V4 Pro is fully validated on domestic processors, including Huawei's Ascend processors. You've got domestic chip companies like MetaX and Cambricon backing it, and it's even being officially tested by the China Academy of Information and Communications Technology. This isn't just a startup being scrappy, it's a massive signal of a national-level push. The US models are relying on these closed, tight systems, while this Chinese open-source model is actively aligning with local hardware to become completely self-sufficient.
And that self-sufficiency creates sheer mathematical panic for the US labs. When we look at the cost per million input tokens, the previous standard for top-tier US models was hovering right around 14.5 cents. DeepSeek V4 Pro, they dropped that to 3.6 cents. And their V4 Flash model is literally a fraction of a penny. When you figure out how to run a highly capable model on cheaper, domestic hardware, the main bottleneck completely flips. It's no longer about how to create the AI, it's about how to deploy it absolutely everywhere.
And we're seeing the results of this play out immediately in the real world. Real developers like Yang Hua at a Shanghai gaming company are suddenly using V4 to manage massive amounts of files for basically pennies. He noted he spent less than a tenth of what he paid using previous US models, and yet the efficiency and capacity felt almost exactly the same. That right there is the existential danger for the established players. When the underdog is 90% cheaper and quote-unquote just as good for your daily tasks, brand loyalty evaporates overnight.
Section 2. Giving AI a cyber finger. But here's the thing. DeepSeek V4 isn't just cheap and hardware independent. They've actually introduced a massive technical breakthrough in how AI visually processes the world. This part is genuinely fascinating.
So researchers from DeepSeek partnered up with Peking and Tsinghua universities to tackle this huge problem called the reference gap. Traditionally, companies like OpenAI or Google try to make their AI smarter by essentially forcing it to just see more pixels. They use higher resolutions, zooming, dynamic image splitting, just brute forcing visual detail. But DeepSeek argued that seeing more pixels isn't actually the problem. The real problem is that the AI loses track of what it's looking at while it's trying to think. So they gave the AI a cyber finger. Instead of just staring at an image, the AI uses coordinates and bounding boxes to physically anchor to an object. It's literally pointing at the screen while it reasons through a problem.
The efficiency of this new approach is absolutely staggering. When processing a standard 800 by 800 image, instead of trying to memorize every single pixel, DeepSeek only remembers exactly what matters by pointing at it. It uses just 90 visual memory entries. 90! Now compare that to the heavyweights. GPT 5.4 needs 740 entries. Claude needs 870. Gemini needs 1100. DeepSeek isn't trying to see harder. It just knows exactly where to look. And that means much faster answers and drastically lower compute costs.
And because of this cyber finger, the performance jumps we're seeing in specific spatial tasks are massive. In maze navigation tests, which are notoriously difficult for AI vision models by the way, DeepSeek scored a 66.9%. It completely wrecked the competition. GPT 5.4 was sitting at 50.6% and Claude was at 48.9%. When you give an AI the ability to actually point and trace its steps, complex visual reasoning just becomes incredibly efficient.
Section 3. The Underdog's Momentum. Okay, so we have cheap hardware, we have brilliant software architecture, and we have massive price cuts. But let's look at the structural power behind all this code. Who is actually building this? Well, the Underdog is making sure they lock in their top talent. Recent corporate filings show that founder Liang Wenfeng's stake in the company rose significantly to 34%, which shows some really heavy internal investment and confidence. Their top talent, like senior researcher Chanderi, is out there highly visible, representing them at major global events like Nvidia GTC. Their research team is expanding rapidly too, growing from 212 to 270 recently. But here's the kicker. Out of the 18 key contributors to their previous R1 model, they retained almost all of them. They are keeping their best minds in-house to maintain this relentless pressure on the US labs. Section 4. Token maxing and the new rules. And this brings us to the most crucial point of this whole explainer. What exactly happens when an AI this powerful, with a foundation this solid, becomes this incredibly cheap? Well, it changes the entire economy of artificial intelligence.
Have you ever heard of Jevons paradox? We are running straight into it right now. It's an economic principle that states when a resource becomes cheaper and more efficient to use, we don't actually end up spending less money or using less of it. Instead, our behavior changes and our consumption of that resource fundamentally explodes. And in the AI world today, this explosion in enterprise usage is becoming known as token maxing.
To really grasp token maxing, just look at the scale of what big companies are doing. Disney had engineers using Claude 51,000 times a day. So much that they had to build a dedicated dashboard just to track the adoption. Meta literally gamified their internal usage with a leaderboard to see which employees use the most AI. And Visa burned through 1.9 trillion tokens in March alone. Trillion with a T. When giants are burning trillions of tokens a month, a cheaper model doesn't even need to win every single benchmark against OpenAI. It just needs to be good enough for daily tasks, and the massive cost advantage takes care of the rest.
And that brings us to the new rules of the AI war. The bottleneck is no longer about who can create the absolute smartest, most expensive, godlike intelligence in a vacuum. The new formula is remarkably simple: strong enough, cheap enough, open enough, easy to deploy. That is what wins enterprise workflows today. That is what spreads intelligence into every corner of the economy.
Which leaves us looking at the horizon. OpenAI is incredibly powerful. They are ambitious, and they are clearly moving toward these massive super agents that can run your entire digital life. But with GPT 5.6 looming somewhere in those secret backend logs, and the open source side aggressively attacking the market from below with brutal price cuts and local hardware, who actually wins this new war of efficiency? Does OpenAI fire back with a massive leap forward soon, or has the disruptor already changed the rules of the game forever? Think about how your own workflow might change if AI costs practically drop to zero tomorrow. Let that sink in as we watch this space.